Hey, what's up guys? I'm Jacob Kaufman, I'm the Street, and today we are talking about why Linux is free and why nobody is capitalizing on that, because obviously it's a really great operating system. Now, you can find a companion article to this video in the description below, complete with sources and citations and everything. Yay. So, as you remember, I wrote that article the other day about Linux versus Windows. I did not make a video about that. Maybe I should. It was Linux versus Windows, and basically it was about going through point by point why Linux is better than Windows. You know, we've got speed, feature. Why don't I pull it up, actually? So we talked about price, ease of use, security. Obviously, everything that Linux has over Windows is really great stuff. You know, it doesn't get viruses, but if it doesn't get viruses, and it's faster than Windows, and, you know, this and that, I didn't put it was faster in the article because I didn't have enough, like, sources at the time. But yeah, why is Linux free? If it's so much better than Windows, then why does Microsoft sell Windows, first of all, for so much? And why is Linux free? Well, Windows 8.1 full version is $120. So Windows, why is Windows $120 more than Linux if Linux is so much better? And why is Linux free? And why isn't anyone selling Linux? Well, I have taken some notes about this. When we're talking about Linux being free, before we can talk about why it's free as in price, we need to talk about the fact that there are two different things that people mean when they say that something is free, or when they say that Linux is free. They mean free software as in it's free from cost. There's no cost to Linux. You can get it without paying anything. But they also mean another kind of free. Free as in freedom. You have the freedom to view the Linux source code. You have the freedom to change that source code. You have the freedom to redistribute it to whoever you want. Unlike Windows, obviously, if you were to redistribute source code, Microsoft could sue you for copyright infringement, piracy, basically. And Linux is free from that. Linux, it's actually more focused around, it's called open source. And you are free to do whatever you want with the source code and give it to whoever you want. So that would be why so many different groups, Ubuntu, Fedora, OpenSUSE, why so many groups are able to get the source code. Because Linux is Linux. The reason there are so many distributions is because people get the source code from Linux, they compile it, and they add stuff to it, and then they release it as distributions. Thank God, because I don't even know how hard it would be to compile Linux from source and install everything manually. Now, as you can imagine, being open source kind of is a major part of why Linux is free of cost. Obviously, if it's open source, first of all, if you want to sell it to someone, there's a very good chance that someone else is going to be giving it away for free. So, if you're saying, hey, I'll give you Linux for $20, somebody else is like, hey, I have Linux for free. Obviously, people are going to go for the free one before they go for your version. Also, though, because Linux is open source, and it's published under the GPL, which I'll get to in a moment, if you were selling Linux, somebody could just buy your Linux and rebrand it, take out all of your trademarks, graphics and stuff, and then they could just resell it under a different name. Same code, and that would be perfectly legal because it's Linux. And there's actually a few examples of that. For one, CentOS. CentOS is a distribution for servers, and it is called, well, it's called CentOS. It is known as a Red Hat clone. Red Hat is a distribution of Linux that sells Linux. Now, at this point, you're probably like, wait a second, Jacob. You just said that you couldn't sell Linux. Selling Linux was against its terms. How can Red Hat be selling Linux? And Red Hat is the name of the company that makes Red Hat Linux. And Red Hat also sponsors Fedora, but just putting that out there. So how does Red Hat sell Linux if you can't sell Linux under its license? Well, that's because they're not actually selling Linux. You see, you can actually make money off of Linux perfectly legally. You just have to not profit off of the code itself. Rather, you're profiting off of other things. For instance, if I were to open a business on my website selling Ubuntu CDs, and people are paying me for Ubuntu CDs, well, is that against Ubuntu's terms? No. Because they would not be paying me for Ubuntu itself. They could get Ubuntu for free from Ubuntu's official website. They're paying me for two things. They're paying me, one, for the physical disk. So subtract whatever the cost of the CD was from that, and then whatever's left, I'm not just cheating them, they're also paying for my service of, first of all, putting Linux on the disk, and then giving it to them. So, yeah, that is one way that you can pay for Linux and not be getting screwed, because, you know, hardware costs and service costs. And along the lines of service costs, there's also companies who sell support for Linux. This is exactly what Novell does. It's exactly what Red Hat does as well. And, yeah, Red Hat sells Red Hat Enterprise Linux. You can get Red Hat Enterprise Linux, or you can get its source code, and you can give its source code to whoever you want after you have it. That's why CentOS is a thing. However, when you buy Red Hat from Red Hat Enterprise Linux, which is specifically geared toward enterprise class systems, like, you know, huge companies with thousands of machines that need all connected to one server, then Red Hat is not only going to give you Linux and the CD that Red Hat goes on, they are also going to provide you enterprise class support. They are going to probably send someone out. If not, they're going to give you contact details for people who will personally ensure your company's use of Red Hat Enterprise Linux is successful. They will oversee you installing Red Hat Enterprise Linux, and if you ever have a problem that you can trace back to Red Hat, then you can contact them. They will give you premium support. Now, obviously, like Ubuntu, you don't get premium support for. Ubuntu is, like, run by a company. Canonical is an organization, but they don't provide support. They host websites such as the Ubuntu forums or Ask Ubuntu, and then other users can support you. But obviously, for a company, you can't sit around waiting for other enterprise-level users to help you, because, first of all, there aren't a whole lot of enterprise-level users out there who are going to be willing to go around and help people. And secondly, yeah, if you're an enterprise-level user, you probably don't want to help other enterprise-level users because they're your competition. So yeah, premium support straight from the company. SUSE as well. You know, SUSE does, or Novell does things for Windows. It's got, like, my school uses ZenWorks, which Novell makes. Novell also happens to make SUSE, and Novell publishes a free version of SUSE called OpenSUSE. But Novell does sell SUSE, and they sell premium support. And if you buy SUSE, then they will oversee your company, and your company can contact them for tech help if you need it. Now, usually that's very, very expensive, and it is enterprise-level stuff. So, for the majority of users, even like mid-sized businesses, you're not going to pay for that. But yeah, that's another way people can profit off of that. Another way, like I said, CDs are one piece of hardware. Another piece of hardware is just computers. You know, I can sell computers, and I can put Linux on it and sell it to people for $120 less than if I were putting Windows on it. And Dell has done that in the past. They have not done it recently, but like, I think it was either 2004 or 2007 or some oddball year like that. Dell did put out a line of Dimension computers that shipped with Ubuntu. And it was cheaper than the version that came with Windows, because obviously Dell doesn't have to pay Microsoft for Windows. And that's another reason why companies support open source software. Why does nobody try and capitalize on open source software? First of all, it is against the GPL. And I'm going to talk about the GPL now. GPL stands for General Public License, and an organization called GNU puts that out there. Now, GNU is kind of the organization's only official name, because GNU stands for GNU's Not Unix. That's what GNU stands for. It's a recurring acronym. But yeah, GNU has the general public license that anybody is free to use this. They've published this on their website. They've said, we came up with this license for free and open source software. Or really, it's just open source software, but same thing. And they have published this on their websites, and any developer who wants their stuff to be open source, then they can just say, okay, I'm publishing this under the GPL. And then this license on GNU's website will apply to that software because the author said so. So the preamble of the GNU starts with the GNU General Public License is a free copyleft license for software and other kinds of works. And basically what allows this to work is the fact that the GPL is a copyright. It is a copyright. It's legally, like, governments would classify this as a copyright. It is a license that software goes under. And if you put this on your software, then yeah, it's part of your copyright for that software. Now, most copyrights have something along the lines of saying, you can't distribute this. You can't copy this, you can't change this. It's telling you what you can't do. However, there's nothing that legally says copyrights have to do that. Just logically, that's what copyrights have been used for in the, majority of copyrights. But the GPL is a copyright that says you can do this. You can distribute this. You can modify this. You can view the code for this, the source for this. And it does say you cannot change this license. Anything under the GPL, you are allowed to copy, distribute, change, and distribute however you want. You're allowed to charge for copies of it, because it's a service, copying it for people. But the one thing you can't do is strip the software of this license. If you copy something with this license on it and redistribute it, then your distribution also has to be under this license. And that is why no Linux distribution can charge for Linux itself. Obviously, there are a lot of loopholes. Now, why don't more people take advantage of those loopholes? Oh, we're charging for the service of distributing this. Obviously, yeah, you could do that. Why don't people do that? Because why would people buy that? There are hundreds, I want to say thousands, there are at least hundreds of Linux distributions, dozens of popular ones. And, if some individual Linux distribution wants to charge for their distribution, and if some distributions do this, where they charge for a premium version of the distribution, you pay for this version of our distribution, we'll throw in X, Y, and Z that you cannot get anywhere else. We have specially designed it just for paying customers. And people can buy that. And people do buy that. But if a distribution says, alright, we are going to charge for ours, and it does not have anything special, then, most people who are using Linux are smart enough to say, why would I get this oddball Linux distribution if I could just get an Ubuntu, Fedora, OpenSUSE, Debian, Linux Mint instead? So yeah, why don't companies, or why do companies support open source software? Obviously, if companies didn't like open source software, and if they wanted to capitalize, like I said, there are loopholes and they could capitalize. There are actually a couple of reasons, though, why companies like free and open source software. For one thing, they are allowed to write stuff for it. If you are going to write something for Windows or Mac OS, then you're going to need to get Microsoft or Apple's permission for using their source code. And also, if you're going to sell a computer with Windows on it, first you're going to have to buy Windows to put it on the computer. Same thing with Mac OS, although Apple doesn't really allow that. But yeah, manufacturers such as Intel, AMD, other, I guess, those are really the only two processor companies, Intel and AMD. But like graphics card companies, AMD, ATI, NVIDIA, even just, Dell, HP, like original equipment manufacturers, they don't have to ask people permission to write software for Linux. And while I'm having this thought on my head, people own Windows, obviously. Microsoft owns Windows, Apple owns Mac OS. Who owns Linux? You might say Linus Torvald. Yeah, Linus Torvalds. But he doesn't own Linux. He was the founder, the creator of Linux, but he doesn't own Linux. I got a quote from linfo.org/Linux. Or no, linfo.org/Linux. Linus. I'll put the link to this quote in the description. This is why I don't normally do citations in my videos. Anyway, as of 2006, about 2% of the Linux kernel was written by Linus Torvalds himself. The other 98%, obviously, when Linux started, 100% was written by Linus. But 2006, only 2% was. So is Linus hiring people? No. No. Other people are taking that, changing it, sending it back to him, and eventually they just stopped sending it back to him, and they're just distributing it amongst themselves. People change it, pass it on to the next person. That person changes it, passes it on to the next person. If they don't want to change anything, they can still pass it on. Somebody else will change it. And over the course of just, I can't say a specific number, probably like around 50 years. I don't know. Sounds like the best estimate to me. And over the course of around 50 years, 98% of Linux is not even written by the person who originally created it anymore. So, nobody really owns Linux. And, like I said, why do companies like that? They don't have to ask anyone permission to write stuff for their stuff, to write drivers for their hardware, drivers for their software, programs, anything. Also, manufacturers like open source software because if they don't write a driver for their hardware, somebody else probably will. Until very recently, NVIDIA graphics cards, NVIDIA did not publish Linux drivers for their graphics cards. There were still Linux versions of NVIDIA card drivers, but that's because the community did that. People bought NVIDIA stuff, said, hey, this doesn't work with Linux, and they made it work with Linux. Can't do that with Windows because Microsoft would swap you down, and you don't have Microsoft source code for Windows either. Can't do that with Mac OS. You don't have Mac source code. You don't have access to source code just because you have a program, by the way. I don't understand how that works at this point. If anyone wants me to research that and let you know, then let me know. But I'm not sure how that works, but just because you have Windows, you don't have the Windows source code. Just because you have Mac OS, you don't have the Mac source code. But Linux, you do have the source code. So you can develop for Linux. And other people will develop for Linux for other companies that they're not even working for. Just they're doing free work. And I made a video about that. It was called Why Linux Has Bad Software Support. Don't be fooled by the title. It was not critical of Linux at all. So, like I said, why don't people capitalize on Linux? It's because Linux is open source, and open source does not mean it has to be free, but open source almost implies that it's inherently free. If something's open source, it's going to be really hard for someone to sell it because somebody else could just give it away for free. So that's why people don't sell Linux itself. Manufacturers don't try to capitalize on Linux because if they did that, then it would cost more money than simply using the free software that nobody owns. It's cheaper to use something nobody owns than something that someone owns. Because if you're using something that Microsoft owns, you're going to have to pay Microsoft. You don't have to pay anyone to use Linux. And finally, why don't people capitalize on Linux? They do. People do capitalize on Linux all the time. Like I said, hardware, people sell computers with Linux on them. I'm going to be selling a Elemention very soon, and I am installing Ubuntu on it right now. I thought I was installing Ubuntu on it right now. The screen went blank and it won't turn back on. People sell CDs with Linux on them. They sell support for Linux. And people can still sell programs for Linux. You can write a program for Linux and you can sell that program. You're not selling Linux, you're just selling a program that works on Linux. Same as selling a Windows or Mac program. So people do capitalize on Linux all the time. They just don't sell Linux itself. Because the GPL, Linux's copyleft, does not allow that. Now, why would Linus Torvalds write this in the first place? Why would someone write an operating system that's better than any other consumer operating system and give it away for free? Well, from Linux.com, I'll put this link in the description too, Linus Torvalds just this year, in 2013, said, "I do open source because it's fun and it works. Companies who work with the kernel community will waste less time and they'll just work better." So he decided to put this operating system out for free because he believes that the free open source, everybody's passing it around, making changes, progresses faster than the traditional one company does stuff based on feedback model. And if you look at history, Linux 10 years ago looked a whole lot different than Linux does today. Windows 10 years ago actually did not look that different than Windows does today. Mac OS looked kind of different 10 years ago. Like 7 years ago it wasn't that different. Actually, no. 10 years ago Mac OS was not that different than it is today. Actually, OS X was out 10 years ago. But yeah, Linux, it's really does progress faster. Linux doesn't get viruses because people are patching things all the time. And also it just, doesn't allow viruses in the first place that I'll go into some other time. But yeah, I think we can see that the open source model does work like Linux says it does. And finally, back to the point of this video. Like I said, you can sell Linux if you want to, but you're not going to make money off of it just selling Linux, because people can get it from somewhere else. It's not illegal to sell Linux, but it's stupid. And if you want to sell Linux, you're going to have to make changes for people to buy your stuff. And in regards to that, Linus said, if you're a company that thinks your tiny change to the kernel is what gives you a competitive edge, you'll probably be facing economic problems. You'd be much better off worrying about making the best hardware for the lowest price. So, yeah. There you have it. Why don't people capitalize on Linux? Because the founder of Linux said that software should be free and recommends that you try capitalizing on hardware instead. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please check out the article if you'd rather, well, I guess it's really an either-or thing. You don't want to watch the video and read the article, but share this video if you enjoyed it. And yeah, thanks for watching. I'm Jacob Kaufman. I'm Under the Street, and I will see you later. See ya.